The President continues to ignore the law in so many different ways. It's kind of hard to count them all up, but the most recent example I want to talk about today is the effort by the administration to apparently circumvent the law to bring Guantanamo detainees onto U.S. soil. We just passed two pieces of legislation that the President's going to sign a little while ago that continue to carry the provisions that say he cannot move these Guantanamo detainees to the United States. Our leader on that issue for the last number of years has been Senator Ayotte from New Hampshire, and I want to call on her to talk about that.
Thank you, Leader. The law has been very clear in the Armed Services Committee each year, and even when the Democrats controlled the Senate, there have been provisions that have prohibited the transfer of the terrorist detainees at Guantanamo to the United States of America. And so this discussion that you've seen from the administration to say that the President is contemplating an executive order on this issue clearly would violate the law. The law as it stands right now under the Defense Authorization, as just passed on the Senate floor by overwhelming vote, by the passage of the Defense Authorization again, and again by overwhelming vote in the Military Construction Appropriation Bill, which says very clearly that the Congress has said we don't want money spent on modifying or constructing facilities in the United States of America, which would be required because these detainees are being held under the law of war detention. And one of the things that is in this defense authorization that's important as well, the administration has been on an accelerated basis transferring people out of Guantanamo to third-party foreign countries with, in my view, not sufficient assurances that they won't re-engage in the battle. And let's not forget that 30% of those who have been released from Guantanamo are suspected or confirmed of re-engaging in terrorism. And the last thing that one of our men and women in uniform, any of our representatives around the world or our allies should encounter is a terrorist that we already had captured, that they will encounter again and put them in danger. So the Congress has spoken both when Democrats were in charge and also now with Republican leadership that this is not something that the American people want to see happen with Guantanamo. And so the President needs to follow the law, and the law is very clear on this.
Well, another example of the President's lawlessness when it comes to the exercise of his executive authority is the executive action he issued about a year ago on immigration. Last night, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans upheld the preliminary injunction issued by Judge Andrew Hanen in Brownsville, Texas, saying the President did not have the authority to do what he purported to do. What this President seems to forget is that the Constitution divides the authority in this area between Congress and the White House, and only when we work to build consensus and reach solutions do we have the authority actually to change the law. This President seems to think that he's got the authority to do what he wants to do when he wants to do it, regardless of the law. Fortunately for the courts have shut that down in this case, and I'm sure they will in these other cases too.
Well, in case you see an emerging theme here today, we're talking about the President's unlawful action, and as Senator Cornyn pointed out, he's already been smacked down by the courts for his unlawful executive action on immigration. And what this more current issue is very similar but distinct in one way, and that is, at least in this case, Congress has spoken over and over and over again, including with 91 votes just about an hour ago in the United States Senate. The President is going to sign a bill into law and then turn around, and if he follows through on using executive action, violate the very law that he just signed. So this is a recurring pattern with this administration, obviously one that we think is completely out of step with the American people. When it comes to the issue of Guantanamo, not only has Congress acted, but polls show that the overwhelming majority of the American people by a 2-to-1 margin oppose having these detainees brought into the United States. So this is a clear-cut issue with the American people. It's a clear-cut issue with the Congress. 91 United States senators have just spoken on this issue, as we have in past years, and yet the president seems intent on going down this path. We think that's a big mistake, and we certainly hope that the president will change his mind and decide to follow the law, quit the unlawful go-it-alone approach on so many of these issues, work with Congress to try and resolve the problems that face the American people.
And in terms of the president's go-it-alone approach around Congress, he is getting ready to become much more engaged in the UN climate conference in Paris, where he has promised $3 billion of U.S. taxpayer money for the so-called Green Climate Fund. This will be money that will go to developing countries to pass laws to deal with carbon dioxide reduction. When you take a look at it, where this money is really going to go is to bureaucrats, government officials in Africa, in Asia, in other countries around the world, and it is the U.S. money that is the linchpin of this climate conference in Paris. So when we take a look at where the president is going with this, I will tell you, with regard to Congress, Congress does not approve of this pay-to-play approach. If the president is going to try to spend money like this, it ought to be money that actually does good, rather than money that's being spent to make the negotiators feel good. The president, once again, is going to try to circumvent Congress, as he has done with a number of environmental regulations, going around Congress with reinterpretation of old laws. But $3 billion is money that the people of the United States don't support. It's money that our economy cannot afford at a time the government regulations are coming out, making it harder for us to be more energy self-sufficient as a country, raising the cost of energy, costing jobs here at home. Congress will have a say.
Well, it seems the president's still looking for the phone and the pen provision in the Constitution. You know, we were here last week talking about this crazy rule on waters of the U.S. that 58 senators said they wouldn't want to see go into place. Fortunately, now 2 levels of federal courts have agreed that this is a rule that in all likelihood the law does not allow the EPA to pursue. Not long before that, we were here talking about something at the time was called executive amnesty. And just yesterday, the Court of Appeals said that the likelihood is that if this is pursued, that it can't be sustained in court because the president on his own doesn't have the authority to do it. Not too long before that, we were talking about whether the president was going to try to protect people's religious freedom, and now the Little Sisters of the Poor have had a case that they're having to take all the way to the Supreme Court to prove that not only is something the government's encouraged them to do is against their religious beliefs, but obviously to also prove that it really doesn't matter much to them because this is not health care they're going to pursue. And as has been said here before, the Congress voted again today twice, now over and over and over and over again. The president can't do something that the president still says he's going to do, no matter what the Congress says. There is a message here. Hopefully the American people and everybody running for president is getting that message that this is a constitutional process and it needs to be pursued that way.
Yep.
On the going alone sort of theme here, a lot of your colleagues think that the president is going alone on the war on ISIS. Is it time for the Senate to bring up a new UN effort, a 13-year-old one?
Yeah, it's clear the president does not have a strategy in place, so it would be hard to figure out how to authorize a non-strategy. He must feel like he has the authority under existing resolutions that we had passed to do what he is doing. But I personally would not, you can ask other members, I personally would not find it very appealing trying to come up with an authorization for the use of force in this particular way. So I think that's one of the reasons why most members have been reluctant to suggest that's a good idea.
Senator McConnell, what about the Obamacare repeal package coming from the House? How would you like to see it improved if you want to see it improved?
Well, we're working on that. We had a lot of discussion today at lunch. I think one thing is pretty clear to the American people. Republicans think Obamacare was a huge mistake. And when it passed back in 2009, not a single Republican in the House, not a single Republican in the Senate voted for it. We have a totally different view about the appropriateness of this legislation. And if you look at how it's unfolded over the years, everything we predicted is coming true. Higher premiums, higher co-payments, higher deductibles, lost jobs. We want to make sure the American people know we're still on their side. And that's the reason we intend to send Obamacare repeal to the President's desk.
Leader McConnell.
Yep.
President Obama worked to violate those provisions in the NDAA related to the Guantanamo Bay detainees. What kind of response would Republicans have? Would you consider a lawsuit against the Obama administration?
Well, we know he's contemplating it. We know he doesn't have the authority to do what he's doing in the climate area and the other areas that Senator Blunt and others have mentioned. The American people need to send a message by sending a new president a little over a year from now with a different view of what ought to be done in this country. It is very, very difficult to think of anything this administration hadn't screwed up, whether at home or abroad. Abroad, Jimmy Carter said it best when he said, when asked a couple of months ago to assess the president's foreign policy, he said he couldn't think of a single place in the world where we were better off now than we were when he came to office. And look at home, a 2% growth rate, the slowest recovery after a deep recession since World War II. It's time for the American people to go in a different direction. And I hope next November they'll decide to take a new path, a path toward renewed American exceptionalism, toward growth and opportunity here at home. We need to go in a totally different direction.
How would you respond? How would congressional Republicans
Well, we'll see what he does.
Leader McConnell.
Yeah.
On the Obamacare, the governor-elect in your state has indicated he still plans to undo the Medicaid expansion and dismantle Connect. What concerns do you have that 500,000 of your constituents could lose their health coverage?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the governor's race in Kentucky. It was about two issues, Obama and Obamacare. That's what the governor's race a week ago today in Kentucky was about. The new governor carried 106 out of 120 counties, won by 9 points. You betcha he's going to take a look at what he can do to deal with the residue of the previous governor, a very liberal Democratic governor, who has added an incredible number of people to the Medicaid rolls. And they're concerned at the state level because, as you know, in a couple of years, they're going to have a significant financial hit from this. So he'll be wrestling with that, trying to keep the commitments he's made to the people of Kentucky, and I certainly wish him well. Thanks a lot.